The chandeliers of the Grand Manhattan Hotel glowed like frozen stars, their light spilling across marble floors polished to a mirror shine. The charity gala had drawn the city's wealthiest 300 guests dressed in gowns and tuxedos, each movement rehearsed like a dance of power. Conversations hummed like a swarm, deals whispered between glasses of champagne. It was a night built on image, a showcase of perfection, and at the center of it all stood Henry Monroe, the real estate titan who had built half the skyline and believed he owned the other half. He was 60, tall, silver hair cut with precision, his presence commanding every corner of the ballroom. Perfection was not just his business philosophy, but his armor. Every smile calculated, every gesture sharpened to display control. Even now as he greeted donors, his eyes scanned constantly, sorting allies from threats. He embodied the belief that flaws were weaknesses to be hidden, not endured. In the shadow of a marble pillar, Evelyn Monroe stood alone, 24, draped in a gown the color of midnight. She was a picture both haunting and fragile. The right side of her face bore the scars of the fire that had ended her career 7 years earlier, a blaze that stole her place on stage and left her with a father who could not bear to look at her. Whispers floated around the room like invisible daggers. The heiress who used to dance, the girl who had been beautiful until the flames. Guests averted their eyes, their silence louder than cruelty. Evelyn felt their stares like weight pressing her deeper into the shadows. And even as she stood only a few yards from her father, he passed her without acknowledgement, treating her presence like an imperfection on his flawless evening. While the wealthy played their social chess, Nathan Carter moved between them unseen, a tray of champagne balanced effortlessly on his hand. 36, with broad shoulders and steady eyes. He looked like a man who belonged anywhere but here. Years of working service jobs had taught him how to fade into the background, how to be present without being noticed. To the elite, he was invisible. But behind his quiet steps lay a story of sacrifice. Once a pianist chasing dreams, he had set them aside when his wife's illness consumed their savings and finally her life. Now he worked where he could, raising his daughter with the patience and strength of a man who had lost much yet refused to be broken. Lily Carter was 7, waiting in the kitchen with her aunt who worked the prep line. She was small and bright-eyed, with a smile that carried no judgment, only curiosity about the glittering world beyond the swinging doors. She was Nathan's anchor, his reason for carrying trays through rooms filled with people who never saw him. In her innocence was hope, the kind that could warm even the coldest spaces. Together, they formed a triangle of contrast. Henry with his empire and ruthless pursuit of perfection, Evelyn with her scars and silent suffering, invisible even in her father's world, Nathan with his humility and quiet dignity, holding on to compassion in a place that measured worth in wealth. The gala shone with wealth and power, but beneath the surface, currents of coldness and warmth, pride and pain, were already colliding, setting the stage for what would soon shatter the carefully constructed facade of the Monroe Empire. Henry Monroe stepped onto the stage with the confidence of a man who believed the room already belonged to him. The chandeliers reflected in his polished shoes as the crowd fell into silence, waiting for the words of the empire builder they admired or feared. His voice filled the ballroom, deep and commanding, each syllable shaped with precision. He spoke not of generosity or compassion, but of perfection. Lancaster Holdings, he said, had always stood for the highest standards, and anything less was unacceptable. Perfection is not optional. It is the very foundation of who we are. The words rippled through the room like a cold wind. Guests nodded politely, applauding with the empty enthusiasm expected at such events. But for Evelyn, standing half-hidden near a marble pillar, Every sentence landed like a blade. Her father's speech was not aimed at the donors or the cameras. It was aimed at her, the daughter whose face no longer fit his definition of excellence. Her hand trembled around her glass, the golden liquid shaking dangerously close to spilling. She tried to steady it, but the strength drained from her fingers. The whispers returned, sharper now, the sound of pity disguised as gossip. A shame she still comes to these things. How cruel of him to bring her. Nathan Carter noticed. From across the room, while balancing a tray of half-empty flutes, he saw the pain etched on her face. He had learned to read people, to see the cracks others ignored, and in Evelyn he saw someone drowning in silence. His jaw tightened as he shifted his weight, caught between duty and instinct. At that moment the band shuffled their sheets, readying the next piece. A mistake slipped through. The pianist struck the opening notes of a waltz, its melody delicate but instantly recognizable. Evelyn's breath caught. It was the same song that had played on the night of the fire. The music she had danced to before the stage collapsed in flames. The sound wrapped around her like smoke, pulling her back into a nightmare she had never escaped. Her face went pale, her body rigid, her eyes fixed on nothing as memories flooded through her. The crowd sensed it too. The air grew heavy. Conversations stilled, the uncomfortable weight of recognition settling over the ballroom. People exchanged glances, unsure whether to acknowledge what they heard. Henry's jaw clenched, but he did not stop the music. He continued to smile for the cameras, as if nothing was wrong. Nathan could no longer stand still. He set his tray down on the nearest table, ignoring the scowl of a supervisor. His focus was fixed only on Evelyn, who stood frozen in the corner like a figure carved from stone. He began to move toward her, slow but deliberate, each step cutting through the polished crowd. In that moment, a waiter crossed the invisible line that divided their worlds, and nothing in the room would ever be the same. Nathan stopped just a few steps from her, the music wrapping around them like smoke. He placed his tray carefully on the nearest table, his hand steady though his pulse raced. Then he turned, facing Evelyn with the quiet certainty of a man who had already made his choice. Slowly, he extended his hand to her. The ballroom gasped. It was a sound of disbelief, of scandal, of something happening that should never happen in this world of polished rules. A waiter was inviting the scarred heiress to dance. No one moved. No one breathed. The chandeliers seemed to burn brighter, the space between them charged with impossible tension. Evelyn froze. For 7 years her instinct had been to shrink away, to retreat into the shadows. Her head shook almost automatically, her lips forming a silent refusal. She felt the eyes of the crowd pressing down on her, waiting for her to crumble, to confirm their whispers that she was too broken to stand, too ruined to belong. Her father's gaze burned like ice from across the stage, daring her to humiliate him by acknowledging her existence. Nathan did not lower his hand. His eyes, warm and unwavering, held hers. There was no pity in them, only patience, as if he could wait forever for her to believe that she deserved this moment. Then, from the corner of her vision, she caught a movement near the service doors. Lily, peeking out from behind her aunt, waved at her with both hands, her smile wide and innocent. To the child, Evelyn was not a tragedy. She was simply the beautiful lady in the blue dress standing all alone. Something inside Evelyn cracked open. She lowered her glass onto a nearby table, her fingers trembling, and with a deep breath she reached out. Her hand slid into Nathan's, small against his calloused palm, and the ballroom erupted in a storm of whispers. Nathan guided her gently to the center of the floor. The crowd parted in stunned silence. the music swelling around them. He placed his hand at her waist, his touch steady and respectful. Then, with a confident step, he led her into the dance. His movements were practiced, fluid, carrying the memory of evenings spent dancing with his late wife. He did not force her. He gave her space, room to remember what it meant to move freely. At first, her body resisted, stiff and unsure. Years of hiding had locked her muscles in fear. But as Nathan's lead stayed calm and certain, her instincts began to return. Her feet found the rhythm. Her arms softened into grace. She began to turn, the fabric of her gown catching the light, and for the first time in years her scars were not the focus. Her presence was. She was not the ruined daughter of Henry Monroe. She was Evelyn, the dancer reborn. The room shifted with her transformation. Gasps softened into awe. Some guests clutched their glasses, unable to look away, as she reclaimed what had been stolen from her. Nathan's eyes never left her face. He saw not the scars, but the strength returning step by step. Across the room, Henry stood rigid, his smile gone, his composure cracking as his daughter shone in the one arena he could not control. His empire of perfection trembled while she bloomed in imperfection. The waltz built toward its crest, and Evelyn moved with certainty now, her body alive with remembered power. Together they turned, and the crowd, once scandalized, now looked upon her with something closer to reverence. Nathan and Evelyn were no longer simply dancing. They were breaking the chains of silence, proving that dignity could rise in the unlikeliest of places. And as the final chords swirled through the ballroom, they stood locked in the dance, unshaken and unstoppable. The moment of courage burning brighter than any chandelier above them. The music still lingered in the air when Henry Monroe surged forward from the stage, his polished shoes striking hard against the marble. His face was carved with fury, but his steps slowed as he remembered the hundreds of eyes and the glowing red lights of phones raised to record. He had lived his life controlling the narrative. Tonight he could feel that control slipping. The ballroom was split down the center. Some guests looked scandalized, whispering about the audacity of a servant touching the heiress. Others stared in silence, unable to turn away from the sight of Evelyn moving with grace and defiance in the arms of a man who treated her as whole. Henry stopped a few feet from them, his jaw locked, his voice straining with command. But Evelyn did not release Nathan's hand. For 7 years, she had lived in silence, allowing others to decide how she appeared, how she existed. Something inside her cracked open under the weight of that night, and words she had buried too long finally spilled free. She lifted her chin and said she was tired of asking permission to exist. The room shivered with the force of it. Whispers swelled into waves, bouncing off marble and glass. Phones that had been discreet now rose higher, capturing every second. The man who had built his empire on perfection now stood exposed, his own daughter breaking the spell he had cast for decades. Henry's face drained of color, his control crumbling with every pair of eyes that no longer feared him. Evelyn's voice did not shake. Each word cut through the silence with clarity, a blade against the polished mask of her father's world. Nathan stood beside her, steady as stone. He did not interrupt, did not claim her moment, but his presence gave her the ground to stand on. He was the anchor in the storm, silent but unyielding. The shift was undeniable. Power began to tilt, sliding away from Henry toward the scarred daughter he had tried to erase. What began as humiliation became something greater, a public reckoning no speech or lawyer could undo. And in that moment, a bond was born between Evelyn and Nathan. Not romance yet, but an alliance forged in defiance. 2 lives standing together against cruelty. The ballroom had barely recovered from Evelyn's words when the heavy doors opened. A man stepped inside, older, shoulders stooped from years of labor, but his eyes clear with purpose. Corbin Hayes, once the stage engineer no one had listened to, held a thick folder pressed to his chest. The sight of him drew confused whispers, then silence as he walked to the center of the room. He opened the folder and raised the papers, speaking with the steady weight of truth. Safety reports ignored, signatures authorizing budget cuts, documents tying Henry Monroe directly to the fire that had scarred his daughter. The crowd erupted, guests gasped, phones shot up higher, livestream comments flooding in faster than anyone could follow. The empire of control Henry had built began to collapse in real time. Some called lawyers, others whispered to reporters. For the first time, Henry looked small, cornered by the truth he had buried. Evelyn felt the storm pressing around her, the noise, the eyes, the flood of voices all colliding at once. Her knees wavered, the weight of exposure almost too much. But Nathan was there. He did not speak. He did not need to. His hand remained at her back, steady, keeping her upright when the world threatened to drown her. Then a smaller hand broke through the chaos. Lily ran from the kitchen, her aunt calling after her, but the little girl would not stop. She reached Evelyn, her small arms clutching a music box worn smooth with years of love. She pressed it into Evelyn's scarred hands. The soft voice of a child cut through the noise, telling her that music makes everything better. Evelyn's eyes filled. The walls she had built, the armor of silence and shame, began to crack. She knelt, pulling Lily close, her hand trembling as she held the gift. For the first time in years, warmth seeped through the cold. She was not alone. Nathan's strength and Lily's innocence wrapped around her like light breaking through smoke. The crowd still swirled in chaos. Henry still fought against the truth. But Evelyn's focus shifted. For the first time since the fire, she felt the possibility of a future, fragile but real. And in that moment, she chose to hold on. The ballroom shattered into chaos the moment Corbin Hayes finished speaking. Guests pressed forward, their phones raised high, live streams capturing every second as the truth spread across the city in real time. Words like negligence, betrayal, and cover-up flashed across comment feeds. Reporters' numbers lit up on phones, and whispers turned into open outrage. The empire Henry Monroe had spent decades building began to crack in front of 300 witnesses. Henry tried to seize back control. He stepped forward, his voice booming over the noise, claiming these were baseless lies, an ambush orchestrated to smear his reputation. He insisted Evelyn had been injured in an accident, tragic but unavoidable. His words echoed with authority, but his eyes betrayed panic. The crowd did not buy the performance. The walls he had built of money and fear no longer held. Then came the slip. His mask of control cracked, and fury rushed through. He turned toward Evelyn, his voice sharp and venomous. He called her a reminder of failure, a scar he had been forced to look at every day. He spat that she was an embarrassment to him, that she had destroyed everything he worked for simply by existing. The words were cruel, raw, unfiltered. They carried through the microphone, amplified across the ballroom, captured on hundreds of recordings. The silence that followed was devastating. Even the band faltered, instruments going still as the room froze in shock. Then the tide turned. Gasps became murmurs. Murmurs became condemnation. Board members pulled out their phones, calling emergency meetings. Investors stepped aside, their faces grim, already cutting ties. Guests who once smiled at Henry now backed away as if from a man infected with rot. His empire collapsed not from outside attack, but from his own arrogance spilling into the open. Evelyn did not shrink. For the first time in 7 years, she stood taller, no longer bowed by shame. Her voice rose above the chaos, clear and steady. She declared that she would not be anyone's shame, that her scars told a story of survival, not defeat. Phones caught every word, and within minutes her face was streaming across millions of screens, no longer a hidden tragedy, but a symbol of courage. Nathan stayed by her side, his hand steady at her back, but he never stepped in front of her. He knew this was her moment. His strength flowed quietly into her, anchoring her while she claimed the light. Corbin handed the documents to reporters who had already arrived, and the room became the birthplace of justice, long delayed. By midnight, headlines had spread across every network. Monroe Holdings faced investigations, lawsuits, and resignations. By morning, the board had forced Henry into suspension, and yet the story that captured the world was not his downfall, but Evelyn's rise. Clips of her declaration trended across every platform, her courage resonating with strangers who had fought their own silent battles. Justice had been served. Henry was broken by the perfection he worshipped, undone by the cruelty he could not hide. Evelyn, scarred but unbowed, walked out of the ballroom knowing the war was not over, but the silence was. Her journey was only beginning, and for the first time in years, she was ready to face it. 1 year later, the theater rose again, its chandeliers glowing against freshly polished wood, its exits clear, its sprinklers shining in readiness. Evelyn Monroe stood at the center of the stage, the same place that once stole everything from her. But now, she did not hide. Her scars caught the light without shame, part of her story, rather than something to erase. She moved with quiet strength, each step flowing into the music, no longer chasing perfection but embracing truth. At the piano, Nathan Carter played with steady hands, his eyes following the rhythm of her dance. His music was not background but a bridge, carrying her across the stage with warmth and care. In the front row, Lily clapped and cheered with the joy only a child could give, her small voice rising above the hush of the crowd. When the last note faded, the theater erupted. The applause was not for a flawless performance, but for the courage to return, to shine as herself. People rose to their feet, honoring the journey more than the movement. Evelyn bowed, tears slipping down her cheeks. But this time, they were not tears of pain. They were release. Her life had changed beyond that stage. She had opened a small studio, teaching children who had been told they were different, too fragile, too imperfect. She guided them with patience, showing them that their bodies, however marked or shaped, could still create beauty. Her scars became proof that survival could inspire. As the crowd's ovation continued, Lily ran onto the stage. In her hands was the little music box, its surface worn from years of touch. She wound it carefully and held it up. The soft melody floated into the air, gentle and unpolished. Evelyn bent to embrace her, her heart swelling as she listened. Her life was not perfect. It was real. And that, she realized, was more than enough.